Hello and welcome to Ask an Author with Julia Kelly. I am so excited this week because I have a good friend with me joining me to talk about her brand new book. Would you like to introduce yourself and tell people who you are?
Yes, so my name is Madeline Martin, and for those of you who know me from Step in the Story, Julie and I do that together. And so we've come to be friends over that. And so this is so much fun because it really is just sitting down and chatting. Well, sitting down in two opposite countries, chatting with a friend.
Yes. Two opposite
So,
countries, two opposite climates, all
yeah,
sorts of things.
exactly. Yeah, because it's 84 degrees here right now, and
It is
which is why I'm
not.
wearing the tank top.
It is not 84 degrees here.
So,
So I had the fire going yesterday and the day before. So we're still very much in that cold British spring. But that's not what we're here to talk about today. We're here to talk about your brand new book, The Last Bookshop in London. I keep wanting to say England because I have a
oh,
last in my name too. So
yes.
this,
The
which
last,
is,
yay.
yeah,
I know,
which is
it was funny with your The Last Garden in England. I kept wanting to say London.
exactly. We're a mess. We'll get there in the end. It will all work itself out. But I'm really excited to talk about this book because it is a book set in London where I live, and it's set in World War II, and it goes through some of the Blitz, which is a really, really fascinating period of time in the history of London. And I'm so excited for people to pick up this book because it's kind of, I find it a little bit of a struggle sometimes to tell people, I think your book is really charming, even though it's about World War II and it deals with some
Right.
things that can be a bit more difficult, but the characters are so charming in this book. And the whole idea of centering around a bookshop is just delightful. So perhaps you could tell people a little bit about what it is that they can find when they pick up The Last Bookshop in London.
So the last bookshop in London is like Julia said, it takes place during the Blitz. So this is like the time period where basically Germany was bombing England for I think it ended up being 7 months, and it was a very difficult time period for the British. And so I kind of like put it together where there was this one major event. Sorry, my brain is snagging a little bit.
No worries.
You know how
We'll
it always
stumble through together.
whenever you have to tell someone about your book, you're like, okay, don't do too much, but try to make
Yep.
sure. So I always struggle with that. So basically on Paternoster Row, it's where the publishing industry is in London. And that actually was bombed one night toward the end of December. And it wiped out almost 5 million books, they estimate, actually were burned. And at the time, paper was being rationed just because of the war going on and everything. So that was really a very devastating loss to the publishing world. So it really was something where with this book, I wanted to make it all about the idea that one small little bookshop can really help bring together this broken community and make everybody feel whole through the love of literature. So
So I am so glad that you've already teased a little bit about this book. This is a book about community because I think that shines through so wonderfully and sort of captures a lot of the Blitz spirit in London. But just so that we can kind of get into some of the fine details here, can you tell me a little bit about the characters that we meet through this book?
right. So the main character is Grace, Grace Bennett, and her best friend Viv is sort of the vivacious, fun loving. She kind of, lives life a little more on the edge kind of
Mhm.
friend. And Grace is definitely a little bit more conservative. And I actually have her coming into the story, and I don't know if this is something that you address later, but not really being much of a reader. And the reason why I actually did that is so, in my other books that I write are actually romance. And
Mhm.
so with this, with romance, people like to read that because they want to experience that love of falling in love over and over again. And so I tried to take that and put it into what it's like for a reader to find reading and falling in love with literature again.
Mhm.
And so that was why I actually had Grace starting off not being a reader, so that as people are reading the story, they can experience that joy through her eyes all over again. And then so that's kind of Grace and Viv. And then her landlady is Mrs. Weatherford, which is her late mother's best friend, and her son, Colin. And Colin is, oh, he's such a sweet guy.
He
Like
is.
he's a smart, sweet guy. He works at Harrods. They used to have, it's like a big department store, and they actually had like a whole animal section. You could get, jaguars and elephants and
Just
alligators.
casually.
Hey, I'm going to go out and pick up some flour and grab a guinea pig and an elephant on the way and an ostrich. Why not? Like it is crazy. So those are some of the main characters. And then of course we have Primrose Hill books. And Mr. Evans is the owner of that. And he is the quintessential curmudgeonly bookstore owner who has that hard shell, and maybe there might be some soft squishiness in the middle.
Yeah, I really enjoyed getting to know him throughout the book.
Thank you.
So perhaps you can tell us a little bit more about Primrose Hill Books as well, because it's not just a setting, it becomes a character in and of itself as well throughout this book.
Yeah, so Primrose Hill Books, when Grace first starts working there, she's pretty intimidated because she has worked in her uncle's store before, and it sold more household goods, which we all use household goods. But with her not being very much of a reader, she wasn't sure how to take this on, especially when she walks in and the owner is grumpy and the shop is all trashed and it's just piles of stuff everywhere. It smells mildewy and it's dusty. And so she kind of has to take on the store. And so she starts looking at it as sort of like a to-do list, like a checklist of projects to take on to clean the store up. But I think as she really starts to go through and do all of this, she starts to really appreciate the store so much, especially as she's falling in love with reading at the same time. So it's sort of like this, this journey together of reading and getting Primrose Hill Books really organized and everything.
It's wonderful because you can see she's a really intelligent young woman. She's obviously ambitious, but has sort of lived in this family that hasn't really allowed her, or lived in these conditions that haven't allowed her to really express that, except through minding her uncle's shop, which she's very clear he's not grateful for, except in the fact that it brings in more money. But she clearly has a marketing mind, even if she walks into this bookstore and is the first to admit she's not a reader.
Right.
So it's really interesting when there is that shift and she decides to start reading books. So perhaps you can talk a little bit about that emotional connection to books. And again, as you said, you were falling in love during romance novels. And with this book, you're watching somebody fall in love with reading, which presumably, hopefully, if you're reading this book, you're also a reader and you love books yourself. But this is it's a fun experience, I think, as a reader, watching somebody discover that for themselves.
Thank you. Yeah, definitely. I enjoyed writing that aspect of it. So she actually initially starts reading sort of a little bit, kind of maybe guilted into it a little bit.
Oh, definitely. Definitely guilted into it.
Every story needs to be, needs a love interest. This may not be a romance, but there still has to be a little bit of a love interest.
I agree.
So we have Mr. George Anderson, and with his charming green eyes and smile. And he comes into the shop. He always has gone to that shop with his grandfather. And so when he goes in there and he sees Grace, and Mr. Evans has never had an assistant. So of course they start chatting. Mm-hmm. And he ends up joining the RAF, and he leaves her with an old copy of The Count of Monte Cristo. And it ends up, there's some history behind it. You'll have to read the book to find out. And so he tells her before he leaves, like, hey, I want you to read this book. And he knows that this book is going to just completely sink her into reading. And she's so busy with the shop, though, she doesn't really give it a chance for a while. And then the second she opens up the book and she really starts taking the time to read it, she just falls head over heels into that story and blissfully drowns in it.
She does.
And so that sort of is the start of her love affair with books, if you want to word it that way.
Absolutely. Why The Count of Monte Cristo? Why did you choose that as the first one that your character was going to really fall for?
So I was actually talking about classics with my dad, and my dad recommended The Count of Monte Cristo. My dad was like, man, I read that book when I was a kid and I loved that book. And then I read it again, like when I was older. And he really, really absolutely loved it. And I was having such a hard time coming up with which one to do. Mm-hmm. And I figured my dad is a guy, George Anderson is a guy. I could see him definitely suggesting more The Count of Monte Cristo than maybe Pride and Prejudice,
Sure.
what I mean? And so I thought that would really be an ideal one to choose.
Well, it's funny because my own father this last year reread The Count of Monte Cristo after years and years. And I haven't read it since I was, I think, a senior in high school. It was assigned for summer reading. I have this distinct memory of reading it, going back and forth from my summer job. And my dad said he absolutely loved it. He was telling us it was one of those things he doesn't reread very often, but it was one of those things that was really fun to rediscover. So
Awesome.
I could see why that would be a good one, especially because it's an adventure, it's got a love story, it's a revenge story, which is always exciting, and you're kind of
Yeah.
waiting for the next thing to unfold.
It's also like, you know, where you're taking this person who's like this everyday man and making him like this great, amazing somebody else. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
There's always that transitional kind of thing is always fun to watch too.
Absolutely. What about some of the other books that you chose? Because her reading list, and I almost, and I wish I had done this, I almost jotted down every title. I'm sure you have it somewhere, but I almost jotted down every title in this book just to see, you know, what have I read? What have I not read? What would I go back and reread? And just to kind of try to figure out where you were going with, because there were quite a few classics, but then there's some more contemporary things to her time as well. So I'd love to hear about the process of what you chose and why these books in particular were in there.
So with some of the books, I actually, some of the books I just kind of called up some of the classic ones that my father and I had talked about. And then there are other ones that I felt like were really indicative to the story. Like when I brought up South Riding, and now I can't remember off the top of my head who the author is.
No,
but
I can't either.
but South Riding, the whole basic part of the story was the heroine, it's set after World War II, and the heroine actually goes to this town that's kind of hopeless and defeated, and she helps out with the schoolhouse, and she helps basically bring hope back into this community that feels very defeated from the war, and she brings hope. And so for me, I thought that was really important to actually factor into the story, especially the part of the book, which you have to read to find out, that it comes up in, because I think that was time that she really needed to have hope. So, so some of the things, and then other ones are just, you know, some favorites of mine, like Emma and Pride and Prejudice. You know, I do love those. And so, you know, there's all different kinds. And then at the very end, I actually included Great Gatsby. And the reason I did that is, oh, and now I'm wondering where I actually put it, because I don't have it on me. I should have had it here to show you, but they had these American service books that they printed for American soldiers. And they're literally like the size of a postcard, maybe a little bit smaller. And it's the whole entire book in there. And it was made so that the men the soldiers could put it in one pocket here or tuck it in their camo pocket on their side. I think they still had those now that I'm trying to think of it. Definitely the chest pocket though. And so when Great Gatsby initially came out, the book was a flop. It really did not take off well. But when they made these American service books is what they called them, The Great Gatsby was the most popular of all of those books. That's actually what breathed life into The Great Gatsby. So if they hadn't made the American service books, that book may have just kind of fallen into obscurity. And so that's actually why I happened to mention him holding The Great Gatsby at the very end, because sort of the history behind that one.
I think it's always good for authors to hear that story too, to know that, you know, one of the great American classics was not a great American classic straight off the bat. Sometimes it takes some time.
We flopped.
Exactly. We've all been there.
Yes. So that's my reasoning behind some of those.
So I love, of course, hearing the story about books, and the selection of books is so intentional. And again, you know, you bring up titles so often that it's really a joy as a reader, to go in and go into this book and see so many familiar titles. One of the things that I have to admit, living in London, I'm really embarrassed to say, I've never been to Paternoster Row with all of the bookshops. So it was also really, really interesting to watch you create this world on that row of bookshops. Can you talk a little bit more about what that community meant to London and why it's significant to your story?
Yeah, so actually Paternoster Row goes all the way back to the medieval times, where the reason it's actually called Paternoster is because the priests would go through up and down the row, and they would actually say Paternoster as they were. And so Paternoster Row is how it came about. And later on, I even want to say, like, gosh, now I don't have my notes in front of me, but I want to say, like, even in the 1500s, this really was starting to become like the publishing hub, where all of these, so you have publishers, you have booksellers, and so even after the Great Fire of London, they rebuilt and they came back and they set up shop there and everything. And actually, it's even after the Blitz and after it's all kind of after all was destroyed, it's come back again. And now it's still like the publishing heartbeat really of London. And so I think it's incredible. I mean, talk about the power of books, you know, that it could keep, even if it gets destroyed, still just keeps coming back and beating, you know what I mean? So, yeah.
It is. It really creates this sense of a community, and also gives you a sense of the fact that even though there was a war on, in some ways life did go on, even if it didn't look like what it did before. And I think the presence of bookshops and people coming in and looking for a read, either for distraction or, you know, for entertainment. There are a couple
long
of
hours that you have to sit during all the bombings and everything.
I was going to say, one of the signs that she makes talks about it's something like let a book light up your air raid shelter or something, bomb shelter, right? So it's really interesting to see kind of the very familiar things that we would be, you know, it's no big thing to walk into a bookshop most years when we're not in pandemics, and to have this kind of be this lovely connection throughout this community and see people continuing on with their daily lives. So I wonder, could we talk a little bit about the detail in this book, because the everyday life detail is pretty incredible. You're sketching not just London, but also the day-to-day activities of people's lives. So where on earth do you start with building up that kind of knowledge base that you need?
Oh my gosh. Well, a lot of it came from the mass observations. So mass observations was this initiative that was put together actually before the war even started, where these researchers basically paid out of pocket for hundreds of people to record their everyday life experiences before the war started, during the war, and after the war as well. And these firsthand accounts were integral to my putting together all of this. If you go through and read the book, I can tell you right now that the weather every single day is accurate to a T.
Which is amazing. I've never gotten that detailed.
Well, you know, the funny thing is, I never realized how much people talk about the weather in their diary entries until I started reading hundreds of diary entries. And so many people start the day off with, it was sunny today. It was a little bit overcast and it rained later this afternoon. It was like a full weather report before everybody even talked about what happened that day.
We talk about the weather a lot in this country.
I mean, you know, it's very dynamic.
It is.
So it was really interesting, just kind of getting that. One of the things that I liked about the mass observation is not only did it give a really wonderful viewpoint into people's everyday lives, but it also gave a really wonderful feel for what the culture was like back then. Because when you do have monumentous occasions like a war going on or the bombing starting, you're not going to be the same sort of mood in that culture as you are before and after, you know? And so I think, like, for example, when Buckingham Palace was bombed, I think like with Buckingham Palace being bombed, it was, you know, you would imagine the knee-jerk reaction would be, oh my gosh, I can't believe they were bombed. That's awful. If that can happen to them, what'll happen to us? But the British spirit and the way people saw it was, they're just like us. The king and queen, they're just like us. And it gave
ration books,
camaraderie, you know, rather than horror. And honestly, I think that sort of unflappable British spirit is really what helped get them through the Blitz as well as it did. So
I think you're definitely right. And one of the things that's really interesting in this book is Grace sees kind of two different sides of the bombings in London. So, you know, the war starts off and things are relatively quiet, and it's sort of, she becomes, can I say she becomes an air raid warden? Yeah, she becomes an air raid warden. And it's sort of, you know, she's doing the work, but there's not that much going on. And then everything changes. Everything becomes, it's a very different world when the Blitz starts. And she really sees kind of the best and worst, I think, in London during that time. And it really felt like a growing up moment for her, I think, when she first has to really confront that.
Right. Yeah, no, I completely agree. And I also think that I think it was a great time for her to also like kind of dig deep and find that inner hero that she never really acknowledges that she found. And, you know, that was another common thread, not just in English history, but also in French history during World War II and everything as well. Women, a lot of times, did these incredibly wonderful things. And any time that it would be brought to their attention, they would say, oh, I was just doing what anybody would do.
Right.
You know, and it's interesting because a lot of times you hear these guys who are writing these autobiographies, and and like they're like, oh, I was this hero and all this kind of stuff. And a lot of times, women are here, they're taking care of their children and they're cleaning the house, and their husbands go away at war, and then they go over and they're an ack girl, or they're a land girl, or they're doing some incredible thing. And then the war is over and they go back to doing what they were doing, and they're like, oh, I was just doing what anybody would do, even though they were just like totally awesome.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It's funny. I spoke to Kate Quinn last week about the Rose Code, which has just come out. And one of the things that we talked about was that in some cases, people couldn't talk about what it was that they did during the war. So these women had to pretend that they had just been, in a secretarial position in some office somewhere, when in
Right.
reality, they were in the hub of, the British spying and code breaking. Yeah. And so, to see somebody like Grace, who I think compared with Viv, who has this drive to kind of do something that would maybe be considered a bit more active in the war effort,
Right.
to see her compared to Viv and to understand that both of those roles are important, I think is it's something that comes out really strongly in this book. And so perhaps we can talk a little bit about the different roles that women took on during the war. And I think maybe we can talk about Grace and Viv and then their landlady as well, because I think they each have very distinct roles that they or ways that they approach their war
Right.
service.
Yeah, I mean, well, and the thing is, with Viv, she definitely wanted to do it. She wanted to do something where she was actively, doing something, doing her bit to help out. And she was tired of the Boer War. She couldn't stand just sitting around waiting for something to happen. And she later on actually ends up becoming an ACT girl, just because I think that is such an awesome job for women to have had then. And then with Grace, she thought she was too scared to take on something. And that's ironic because she ends up becoming an air raid patrol warden. And the job that Grace ended up doing is once the bombs start falling, she has to make sure that everybody's in the shelter. They've accounted for everybody who's in there to make sure that if somebody's behind in the house, they know who's left in the house. And while the bombs are literally falling in the streets, they are walking around checking to make sure that homes don't get bombed. And if they do, they can administer first aid or unfortunately help heavy rescue find where the bodies are. Mm-hmm. And it was a very scary job. And a lot of the ARP wardens actually were involved in blasts at one point or another. And there were several of them too that died. I mean, it was a very, very scary job. So here she is thinking that she's taking this job where she's just making sure people are keeping their homes blacked out during the blackout. And really, she ends up having this incredible job. In fact, at one point, Viv comes back and they're walking down the street after a bombing, and Viv looks at her and says, this is what you do? Like, the vivacious, the bold one is looking at the more demure of the two and is like, you do this? Just like in shock because of how dangerous it really is. So, and then we have Mrs. Weatherford, who she's part of the Women's Volunteer Service, the WVS. And a lot of married women did this. And their job, the WVS, as you can imagine, if you get a bunch of wives together, they were literally everywhere and they did everything.
It sounded like
it. It was very organized. They had matching uniforms and everything. So to say even what one thing they did is not even possible because their finger was on the pulse all over London. But one of the things they did was they ran canteens to kind of help people who had been bombed, and even bringing the canteens were like little mobile vehicles that they would give tea and things like that. They were the first ones to meet the soldiers after Dunkirk. For those of you who know about the battle at Dunkirk. So they really were in fact, they were the only volunteer service allowed to be there when the men came back from Dunkirk.
I didn't realize that.
Mm-hmm.
That's really, just dropped my iPad where everybody's questions and comments are. My apologies, everybody. This is how you know it's live.
Right.
No, it's fascinating to see, again, the different ways that people contribute. And I think Mrs. Weatherford in particular has she has changing attitudes towards things throughout the war. And I think her volunteerism really shows how that could be reflected in people's day-to-day lives.
Right. No, I completely agree. And especially in relation to the orphans that she ends up finding later, but I won't go into too much on
I know
that.
it's always tricky wanting to sit there and ask a bunch of questions, but knowing that some people haven't read the book yet, so we don't
I
want to spoil
know.
everything. But
I want to spill the tea on all of it. And then I'm like, oh, you have to let them want to read the book still too.
exactly, well, it's just come out, so people, maybe in about a month you can do a spoiler-free episode
Yeah, there you
or a
go.
spoiler-filled episode. We have to talk about George because George is our romantic hero.
Yeah.
And while he is not in the book as often as a romance novel would see, traditionally would see a hero in the book, he makes a very strong impact. So not only does he give her kind of the book that makes her become a reader, he's also this kind of wonderful presence throughout the book as well. Can you talk a little bit about what it was like crafting the right hero for Grace?
Well, I definitely wanted to be careful with it. The reason why he's not in the book too much is because with being a historical romance author prior to writing this historical fiction, I was really worried that a lot of people would say, oh, she just wrote another historical romance. You know, I really did want there to be a distinction between the two genres. And I do very much still love historical romance. So I'm not naysaying it or anything. I just wanted to make sure there was a clear distinction between the two genres. So with him, you know, I really wanted him to sort of give her the book and give her the idea, but I wanted her to find it herself. And that's another reason why I also didn't include him as much. And then there's also the reality of it. He is an able-bodied man who would be working, I mean, even as an engineer, which is what his profession is, he would have actually been excluded from being drafted because engineers were very important. But I mean, do we really want a hero who's going to rest on his educational laurels and sit back while all these men are out fighting? No. So of course he had to do his bit. And so he signed up for the RAF because of course he had flight experience when he was younger.
Naturally.
And
so all good dashing romantic heroes do.
I mean,
I think I've written a couple of them actually.
they're so tempting, you know. So that was kind of the background with him, is that, I mean, I felt like I couldn't actually have a true hero if he stayed in London where it was, well, I would say safe, but then the Blitz happened, so it's not that safe. But he's not on the front lines with all the other men. And I just kind of felt like that would be more realistic of a hero. That's kind of why I did that. But then of course he has to come back. So
well, everybody gets leave, right? At some point during the war. So
and that was a fun way for them to kind of connect. I was very much on the fence about including some of their written correspondence back and forth with one another. But every time I would try to do it, it came out feeling really cheesy and hokey. And I just didn't want to force it, and it didn't feel like it was fitting with the scene for me. And so instead I had him when he came back and they have that date night, which you have to read to find out. But so, you know, I had that date night where they do get to kind of reconnect. And so you do get to see that kind of halfway through rather than just sort of told with the letter exchange. So
well, and in some ways it's really nice to see because he's changed and she's changed and they get to acknowledge that about each other, and he gets to be duly impressed with her as he should be. You know, he was in the beginning, he's even more so now. And it's lovely to see kind of what she's doing acknowledged and as being important and admirable and all of those things. And I think she is a very admirable character herself.
Thank you. Yeah, and I really, one of the things I wanted to showcase with them too is even though they had some communication prior to that date, the fact that they had, because when you write, I feel like when you write something to someone, you pour so much more of your soul. And of course, you know, we're authors, so we probably do more so anyways, but I feel like you pour so much more of yourself into a letter, say, than you would for a you know, chat over coffee. And so it, to me, I was really excited about the idea of, you've been spending months pouring your soul out to this person who you kind of actually don't really know when you think about it. And then you see them for the first time. And it's like, oh my gosh, I've told this person all of these things and I know all of these things. And so it's like, you know each other, but you're also still a little bit strangers. And I really loved sort of that blend in with like the excitement of the date and everything else that happened too.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's the war is such a strange time in terms of people's romantic relationships, because for some people it just accelerated things so fast. You could
Right.
meet and get married, and some of those marriages lasted beyond the war. Some of them definitely didn't. So, depending on who you were and your approach to life, I think made a
Right.
big difference. But they take a little bit of a different approach, which is they do get to know each other through letter, and they do get to know each other through these kind of flashing, fleeting glances,
Right.
and short dates and things like that. But it's charming, and I think it's very true to what somebody's love story would have been. Somebody like Grace, what her
Right.
love story would have been throughout the war.
Thank you. Mhm.
So I do have to ask about the differences between writing historical romance and historical fiction. Partially, this is a very selfish question, just because I'm curious what your approach is, because I started out doing historical romance as well and have transitioned over to historical fiction. You're writing both at the moment, right?
Yes, I am. Yes.
So what?
So
Yeah, I was going to say, what do you think, in your experience so far, has been kind of the biggest difference in
well, there
those
are
two
certain
genres?
scenes missing from this book than I usually
Yes,
write in my other books. So
yes, very
that would
true.
definitely be the biggest. Actually, really the biggest is the fact that there's only one protagonist. So, usually with my romances, I have the hero's perspective and I have the heroine's perspective. And I was only obviously doing Grace's perspective through this whole entire book.
Mhm.
And I'm not going to lie, when I first started writing it, I was like, oh my gosh, I hope I can do this, because I've never actually written a book in only one point of view before. But I felt that it really, so I love supporting characters.
Mhm.
Um, like I have always fallen in love with my supporting characters. I like to make like kids and cats and people who are surrounding them. And I felt like with only one protagonist, I really got to let those relationships with other people be very rich. And I feel like when you have two protagonists, you don't have the opportunity to delve into those relationships as much, because you have to focus on their relationship. And I think that was probably one of the bigger aspects of it. And also with writing historical fiction, I had carte blanche to go into all of these wonderful nitty gritty details that I found in my research that I got to mention as I was writing. And with historical romance, I always do extensive research as well.
Mhm.
But you can't go into as much of that nitty gritty detail, because you do need to keep the focus on sort of the sexual tension between the hero and the heroine, and their journey together. But with historical fiction, I just got to have so much fun with all those details.
You get to indulge a different side of your writing life.
Yes, definitely. And one other thing too, just the fact that this was World War II and my romances are generally medieval and Regency, it was really fascinating because I got to look at pictures. I got to like for
Of
example, when
course.
I was writing the scenes when they were sitting in the bomb shelter, I actually had an audio on YouTube that I played that played the whole entire recording of a bombing taking place, with the start of the siren of the air raid warning all the way to the all clear siren. And listening to that was so incredibly powerful. And I would never be able to do that with any of my other research books, just because of the time period.
It is, I think, very different writing in a time period where some people are still alive who remember
Oh,
those days. And I'm sure some people will email you and say, I was a child and my father, my uncles, my cousins went off to war. And those, I think getting those emails, there's a certain sense of responsibility with that. And obviously you take that very seriously with the amount of research that you've done and all of those things. But it also just opens up a completely different world of sources that you get to take a look at, which I think
oh,
is
absolutely.
wonderful. Having audio, having video, there's
Yeah.
nothing quite like it for the Regency. So
I actually had, it was somebody who left a review on Goodreads, so, or on NetGalley. So I didn't have a way of contacting them, but they actually said that they had grown up during the Blitz. And she's actually, it was so wonderful of her. She said that my details were so on point that she wondered if I had actually lived through it myself. And that was incredibly flattering, that she
yes.
felt that I had, gotten the details so incredibly accurately, because, as authors, and we do the research, it's nice knowing that your research has really paid off. That you've
Absolutely.
done justice to what these people really lived through.
And I think that that's That's the perfect way of putting it. You want to be respectful of it. You want to do it justice. You want to get the detail right if you can.
Yeah, absolutely.
So we have some questions and things like that popping up, and we are going to do a little bit of question and answer. I do think at this point we've been volunteered for a garden and book tour of
Okay.
the UK. So apparently we're going to be leading that at some point soon.
I'm in.
Why not, right? We've got
Exactly.
some people signing up in the comments, which is
That's
which
great.
is exciting. We so I guess let me think the best way to do this. So we have had some questions about your research process and sort of when do you start with this book? When did you start the writing? Did you do a huge amount of research beforehand and then write, or do you sort of do things simultaneously?
So I front load all of my research. I'm what I like to refer to as a 360-degree author. Like when I'm writing, I need to have every sensory experience going on in my head at that exact moment when I'm writing. And so having all of that front loaded research really helps with that. So, and I am a consummate hand writer. Whenever I can't, I've tried doing some electronic stuff and I'll keep some electronic things occasionally, but I have like 10,000 notebooks all over my house, like a mad woman. And I actually have tried getting to the point where I label them and try to just use only that notebook, but then sometimes I can't find it.
You're in
So,
a different room and
I mean, I'm like, oh, whatever, it's a piece of paper. I need to just write this down. So I'll go through and I'll write down as much as I possibly can, just glean as much information as I can. And even though I'm writing, I will say that the research process really never stops. I was still researching when I was doing my copy edits. And I know that you know this because I know you do the same thing.
Yep, I do. My copy editor is going to hate me for it, but I do it.
But you're like, it'll make it so much better.
It will.
So yeah, I really do most of my research at the very beginning. And I made myself stop after I was at the point of no return with this book because it would be too heartbreaking to find something wonderful that I might miss to put in it and then have regrets. So I just, set it down and I was like, okay, let's move on to another idea.
That's what the next book is for. And then you can continue to see things through. Yeah, definitely. How do you, this is just, again, purely selfish. This is just me asking other writers what it is that they do so that I can get ideas for myself. How on earth do you keep all of that in some form where you can access it as you're writing? You do all this front-loaded research. How are you drawing on all of that?
It really just lives inside my brain. It's
That's
like
amazing.
especially because like as I'm doing research, for example, I'll find things that will inspire a scene or even a character. Like for example, when I was reading through the mass observations, there was a woman who was talking about her son who was just old enough to go to war. And he was an animal lover and he was sitting there and he was petting their dog. And she was looking sadly at him and she was thinking, he's too gentle for war. And that's where my idea actually for Colin came from, because I thought this man needs to have like his side of the story of war needs to be told too. And that's where Colin came from. And so I'll kind of jot down those ideas. But really, I mean, as soon as my hand puts it on paper, it really kind of like catalogs in my brain a little bit. And a lot of those details I can call up now. A lot of times I will be frantically looking for just that one notebook where I wrote that one thing specifically.
Especially when a copy editor puts a note and says, are you sure that this was the way that you think? And you just think to yourself, I know I have it somewhere. I just don't know where it is.
I know. Yeah, I think I did more research in my copy edits than I did when I was writing the book, because they'll tell you, are you sure? And you're like, yeah. Am I? And then you're like, well, I don't want to mess it up, so then you have to go back and follow your breadcrumb. Yeah.
That's a very familiar feeling. Far too familiar for comfort.
I have to talk about wine with this. No.
Exactly. So Diane asks about the board that's behind you, which looks very familiar to me because I've seen this before, and I think I've had a version of that in the past. But she's asking what the board with all the Post-it notes is. Is it what you use for writing your novels?
So this is actually, this is keeping Madeline on track with everything that needs to happen. So it's referred to as a Kanban board. And I took this class recently called Heart Breathings, where they kind of help you figure out, basically, it's so easy to tell yourself, oh, I have 30 days in the month. And if I can write 5,000 words a day for 30 days, but realistically, that's not ever going to happen. So it's sort of looking at a realistic approach to your goals. And so this is the breakdown of that. The top one is what needs to be done. The middle one is what is in the process of being done. And the bottom is done. And as you can see, the top is significantly more full, sadly, than the bottom.
I don't know, that blue one on the left or on my left.
That book came out last month. So that's why.
Got it. Understood.
Yep.
I've actually taken that same course. So if anybody's interested in, it's called Heart Breathings with Sarah Cannon.
Yes.
I believe this is her name. So she does these, and it's for writers, but also other people take it as well, because it's sort of a planner system and all of those things.
I definitely did enjoy it. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. What is your writing routine like? I'm shocked that I actually don't know the answer to this, and I haven't asked you about this before, but what is your typical writing day look like?
Well, actually at the moment with the pandemic and everything going on, it's pretty much just chaos. But
yep.
But generally the way it works is I get up around 4:30 in the morning. I'm very much a morning person. I write in the morning before everybody really gets up. And then I kind of take a moment between the girls going to school I used to try to write through that time. And I learned if I just stop writing when they're awake and downstairs, then I write when I'm done. When they're done, I can focus so much more.
Sure.
And then I'll do like a workout and then take my shower, have lunch. I always take a nap.
Okay.
I get like a 20-minute nap a day. And at this point, I do it so often that I'm like a toddler. Like if I haven't had my nap, I get grumpy. But I would rather get up at 4:00 in the morning and take a 20-minute nap than sleep in until 6:30 and not get one. You know what I mean?
That's interesting. Yeah.
Yeah.
So you're very much a morning writer. That's when your brain is freshest. Absolutely. That's when you feel okay.
Yes. Yeah. And then like, the kids are coming home and stuff like that. And so I just kind of fit it in wherever I can. So, and then social media kind of goes in there as well. It used to be a lot more organized before. Like my oldest is doing distance learning now. And so with having her home and, having my fiance home and then one kid going to school, but always wanting me to pick her up to and from the bus stop, it's been a little bit more chaotic than usual.
It happens to everybody. I think chaos is a good way of describing most people's pandemic writing routines at the moment. You just sort of, you do what you can when you can.
Exactly. Yeah. It definitely is not the 9-to-5 kind of job. I keep telling myself I'm going to take weekends off. And eventually maybe I will.
Yeah, one day maybe that will happen. I think one of the things that's been so interesting doing this series has been maybe dispelling some of the myth that writing happens when you feel inspired and you feel, I think for a lot of us, writing happens when writing has to happen. It just sort of, you find the time where you can and you have a contract in some cases. And so you're working towards that contract, and that's a good motivator.
Yep. Writing happens when the deadline starts breathing down your neck.
Absolutely.
You're like, oh my gosh, I have how much time left? And then you're like, okay, I need to get this done.
The same principle applies for editing too. Absolutely.
Yes, absolutely.
So we've had a couple of questions about your next book, if you can talk about that. And this can be obviously historical romance, historical fiction. I know sometimes you can't share all details, so I don't want to put you completely on the spot, but can you tell us anything about what you've got coming up?
So this is a very special thing where I actually can share because it hit the marketplace today. But I had done so many posts on Facebook today that I was afraid people might kill me if I posted one more thing. So I was like, I'll just post it tomorrow. It's fine. So I do actually have another World War II that I'm contracted for, which I'm super, super excited.
Wonderful.
And, it's actually going to be about 2 women. The publisher's marketplace doesn't go into too much detail, but I will share a little bit of details here. So it's basically going to be about a woman who goes to Lisbon, which is where it's a neutral zone. Mm-hmm. And it's sort of like if you've ever, Casino Royale was actually based off of Lisbon during World War II. So that'll give you kind of a feel for like the excitement and the glitz and glamour and everything going on there. And it's going to be a dual narrative this time. So it's actually going to cover 2 individual women. and the other woman is going to be in Lyon, France. And so you're going to have two very opposite experiences of World War II and how their lives kind of come together. So
if you need a partner for a research trip to Lisbon, I love Lisbon, so I would happily volunteer myself. You just let me know.
Prices not too long ago because I was like, man, it'd be so cool to get to go here.
Oh, it's such a great city. It really is. I went in 2018. There's a week where or a month, but really a week where they celebrate the city, and it's such a wonderful time to be there because there are street fairs and performances, and everybody is
awesome.
just out and about. And yeah, so we'll have to. I'll give you some recommendations if you'd like them.
Awesome, definitely. Girls trip.
Exactly. And it's for research purposes, so it's tax deductible, right? That's how that works.
I love it.
So, being that you've written a book about a reader and you are a reader yourself, I'd love to hear a little bit about what you've been enjoying recently, which I know puts you on the spot. And now every book you've ever read has probably gone out of your head. But I would love, if you can remember anything, I'd love to hear what
actually, I'm pretty lucky on this one that I do remember because I just was asked this like a little while ago. So I didn't freak out too much. So actually, some of my girlfriends and we were talking about actually all the classic books that are in the last bookshop in London. And so we decided that it would actually be fun because there's a lot of classics that either you read when you were in high school or like you haven't read. Like there are some classics that I haven't read before, and that kind of thing. So we thought, what if we made like a BFF classic book club? And so that way, like when you're in a book club and everybody knows what's going on, and then like you don't, and you're like, oh man, like I just didn't get that scene, but you don't want to say anything because you don't want to look like the dunce in the room or whatever, Mm-hmm. So we figured the great thing about doing this with BFFs is you don't have to worry about, if you don't get it, you could just be like, legit, I did not get that passage. I don't even know what all the hype is about. And they'd be like, cool. So right now we're actually reading Dracula, which I don't know that I've ever read, but it's really good. Yeah. So, and then we're going to be doing a writing retreat in a couple of weeks. So we're going to watch the Dracula with Keanu Reeves.
Naturally.
So, I mean,
why wouldn't you? That sounds like a really fun idea and a good one to start with. It's funny. I know the parts of the story very, very well, and the film adaptations. I don't think I've ever successfully read the book. I think I tried it when I was probably a bit too young. Or something that's a little scary, a little unsettling.
A little scary, although I know you in the thriller lane, so
Murder Hall.
Murder Hall.
I like Thriller Lane though. We might have to develop that part of my parents' house.
If you ever need a subsidiary, like if you ever need like a turn off, that can be Thriller Lane and you've got Murder.
I think that's a really good idea. So that people don't think there's a Murder Hall in my parents' house. There is, but it's book related. So my mother is a very prolific mystery reader, and we have she's going to kill me for this. We have a subsection of the sort of quote unquote family library that's just all murder mysteries. And so we call it Murder Hall, and the name has stuck. So.
But yeah, so I was going to say maybe it was too scary, but I don't know.
You never know.
The interesting thing about it though, and I never, this is why I'm thinking maybe I never had read it, because sometimes the story so well, but then you're like, did I actually read that book?
Yeah.
But then again, I also buy the same book over and over sometimes, even though I read it like last year. So my memory cannot be trusted for anything. But it's interesting because the entire book is actually written in journal entries and letters.
Oh, that's interesting.
But it's also, they're so descriptive when they're writing it that you would think that you're actually reading it like a story, like as it's going on. You know what I mean? But really, when you look at it, you're like, oh my gosh, this is literally a collection of diary entries and letters back and forth to one another. And it's very fascinating.
My sister is going to make fun of me because I cannot say this word correctly. So we'll see if I could do it. But I've always wanted to write an epistolary novel.
Okay, yeah.
In letters and journal entries. And the running joke is I can't write it until I can consistently say it. So
you're one step closer because I thought you did a very good job on that.
Thank you. I only had to think about it for about 5 seconds before I said the word. So, but I love that format. I just haven't found the right story to write that would fit the form and the function together. So
right. That makes sense. Oh, we'll have to talk about that because I have an idea. So maybe something to shoot your way.
Interesting. Okay, I like it. So we always get questions about what books made you a reader yourself. So I would love to get a taste of sort of when you were starting to really find your passion for reading. What was it that got you hooked?
Laura Ingalls Wilder. You guys, I loved that series. I read it so many times. I had the old yellow, like that buttercup yellow
I had
paperback.
those.
It had the little square on the front that had, you know, the image or whatever. So I had those. I had the entire series, and you couldn't even read the titles anymore because the spines were so soft from,
Aw.
they were just completely worn away from the so many times that I read it. And so we used to live in Germany, and we had this huge backyard, like this big garden. And my mom bought me a calico print dress and a bonnet. And I ran outside with no shoes on my feet. Like I was Laura Ingalls Wilder. I can't tell you how many summers I passed. I think that dress probably didn't fit me by the time my mom was finally like, okay, we need to put Laura away. So Laura Ingalls Wilder hugely inspired me just as a reader, as a little girl who always got in trouble, no matter how hard she tried to do right, you know, she was like, you know, my bosom buddy in that, you know, I just really connected with Laura. So that series, definitely.
It's funny, those books in some ways are so universal. I read them as well. And I was thinking to myself the other day, I had thought I'd read all of them, but there's one that I think I missed out. Is there one about the title is something, The Farm Boy or something?
Yes. I want to say that, and now of course it's been so many years, and now that's one we should probably read again too. But I want to say that actually was Alfonso's story, her husband's story.
So that's the one I think I haven't read. So I'm missing his perspective from things, but.
Yeah. And you should also look up, apparently there was, I didn't know about this, but apparently Paul was part of like a vigilante crew that went out and took down some serial killers that was in like a shanty on the way to town. Yeah. You have to look into it. Like it's crazy. Like it's a little bit creepy. Definitely a side that you don't see when you're reading all those books and everything, you know, but it was really fascinating. So if you're a Laura Ingalls Wilder fan and you love history, and there may be a little murder hall in all of us, you totally need to check out that like juicy little historical tidbit because it was fascinating to learn about.
I would love to look that up. I'm going to have to go and find that after this. Wonderful. Well, I would love to make sure that you have a chance to tell people where they can find your book, and also if they want to go ahead and follow you on the internet, where they can find you and the best place to keep in touch.
Thank you. So the Last Bookshop in London can be purchased at all of your favorite online retailers, as well as in person. You can find it at Costco, Sam's Club, Walmart, and it will also be in Target starting in May as well. And it's also on Audible. And I'm so excited. Saskia Marlefeld is my narrator, and her voice is like velvet. So if you haven't, just go listen to the sample if you're an audio listener, so that you can fall in love with her voice because it's so beautiful.
And you're a big audiobook listener yourself, so this is a good endorsement.
Yes. In fact, she is like one of my actually, I think she is my favorite. And so the fact that I actually gave the name to my publisher, and they came back and said, Saskia, will do your audiobook. And I was like, oh my God. So I'm totally over the moon about it. Anybody who wants to find more out about me, you can go to my website, madelinemartin.com. I'm also Madeline Martin on Facebook, but if you go to Twitter or Instagram, it's at Madeline M. Martin, because somebody took it before I got to it. I know.
Always the way.
I hate when that happens.
I do. I know that pain. Well, this has been absolutely wonderful. Thank you so much for joining me, and we will, I'm sure, be back hopefully for another World War II book from you in the near future, which I want to get all the details from you behind the scenes. So now I'm going to be very very self-serving and ask you a bunch of questions offline. So. But thank you so much.
And thank you. This has been so much fun. I knew it was going to be fun anyway. So
thank you guys for watching, and we'll be back again next week.
Mm-hmm.